publicity. They haven't done too bad. The only thing I'm missing today, Dave, is the 3-metre high black rat. Where is it? I'm very, it's a great pleasure to be asked to speak today. It's right that I led for the Unite construction workers in the blacklisting litigation for 2 years or so. But I don't really want to talk about that case. There are others here who know the ins and outs of it and may speak about it later, I'm sure. I also have the honour to represent the Fire Brigades Union, the National Union of Mine Workers and UCAT in the public inquiry, the Pickford inquiry into undercover policing. And having read the newspapers this morning, Dave, it seems to me that RMT might well want to seek to become a core participant, as the lawyers call it, in the Pickford inquiry into undercover policing. And over the years, I've had the honour of representing many whistleblowers, particularly in the National Health Service, leading from Graham Pink, the nurse in Stockport, to Dr. Raj Mathur, the well-known cardiologist. But I don't really want to talk about those cases. What I'd like to do is to focus on blacklisting in industry used against trade unionists. As everybody here knows, in 2009, in the raid by the Information Commissioner on the Consulting Association, which was a consortium put together by all the major, not all the major, but most of the major construction companies in this country, a blacklist was revealed containing some 3,200 names, well over 3,000 of whom were blacklisted for their trade union activities. Now, blacklisting used in that way, of course, is just one instrument used against trade union activity for the protection of working people, indeed for the protection of the working class. In a way, I suppose, in this country, we're lucky. We're lucky because we don't live in a state like Colombia, where a trade unionist is murdered every week, even after the recent ceasefire in the civil war there. But this country, of course, has used the state against trade unionists as well. In the miners' strike 30-odd years ago, 10,000 mine workers were arrested, many of whom were in prison, and bail conditions were put on them which prevented them attending picket lines. Of course, the viciousness of the state against trade unionists was manifest in that case, not simply because of the arrest of the miners, but because, as we know subsequently, the state was prepared to close down an entire industry because of the militancy of the miners, and to show them that their rebellion would be punished. Anyway, blacklisting has got a very long history, and Dave's book, excellent book, £8 only, discounted price outside, highly recommend it, and Dave will sign it as well. The book recounts the history of the Consulting Association from the 1970s until 2009, when it was killed off by the Information Commissioner's raid. The extent of blacklisting now, subsequently, of course, is unknown. But if anybody imagines that the time, the effort, the resources that were put in by the construction industry to blacklist trade union activists over decades will simply have ceased, I think you're living in an unreal world. But of course, the Consulting Association had a longer history. It was an offshoot, and this book describes the history of it. It was an offshoot of the Economic League, which was founded in 1919, just after the First World War. Of course, blacklisting itself is as old as industry. It's as old as employment is. there was blacklisting, there's been blacklisting for centuries. If you look at the feudal economy, the way in which agriculture was organised after the Black Death with annual hirings, all described in Thomas Hardy's novels as it subsisted right up until the 19th century. If you were in any way unacceptable to farmers, you would never ever get another job in that county. You had to move to another county to get a job. And if you look at the history of the coal mining unions, the first union set up in the 1830s, blacklisting was used against mine workers absolutely as a primary weapon to crush trade unionism, as indeed they did crush the first attempt at a national mining union in the 1840s. And that's why, I don't know if it's true today, but it was when I was familiar with the miners during the strike, that's why you had miners with Durham accents working in Kent and miners with Scottish accents working in Yorkshire. It was because they were blacklisted in the areas in which they had originally come. So what I wanted to put before you is something that really just occurred to me when I was asked to speak, and that is whether there was some correlation between collective bargaining and blacklisting. And the reason that this thought was in my mind was because the book reminds us, as I just mentioned, that the Economic League was founded in 1919. Now, 1919 was a very historic moment in industrial relations in this country. It was just after the end of the First World War, of course, but it was also after a period called the Great Labour Unrest, just prior to the First World War, when there'd been massive strikes in all manner of industries, showing a new militancy and a new tendency also of workers to organise themselves on a national rather than simply on a district or area basis. And in the First World War, a report by the Committee on Reconstruction, chaired by J.H. Whitley, recommended to the government that industrial relations after the Second World War should be modernised by setting up what we call joint industrial councils. That's to say, equal representatives of employers and workers to come together to regulate by collective bargaining, creating collective agreements which regulate the entirety of an industry national. Basic term would be enterprise bargaining after that. So here we've got, on the one hand, the government setting up Ministry of Labour, promoting sectoral collective bargaining, as we now call it, and on the other hand, subversive elements of the security services and major employers creating this blacklisting organisation called the Economic League. Well, a history of the 20th century is a history in industrial relations terms in this country of a rise of collective bargaining coverage, until you get to a high point in the 1970s when collective bargaining coverage of working people in this country covered 86% of them. 86% of British workers had one or more terms regulated by a collective agreement. And from that moment onwards, it started to slide when Thatcher came in. Well, since Thatcher came in, it's been a disastrous decline and almost collapse in collective bargaining coverage today. It's around 20%. But as the coverage of collective bargaining grew, I can detect no diminution in the extent of blacklisting. The Economic League became more active, not less active, with the rise of collective bargaining. And you might have thought that if those two went in hand, that you have blacklisting and collective bargaining, that when you've got a decline in collective bargaining, you would then have a decline in blacklisting. But I'm not sure that is in fact the case. And we know from what has been revealed about the Consulting Association that the scale of blacklisting, certainly in the construction industry, has been absolutely massive since the 1970s. But blacklisting, of course, took place in other industries as well. When I was young, my dad was an electrician, and he was an official in the ETU and subsequently member of the Executive Council of the Electrical Trades Union. And I remember him telling me that blacklisted electricians, the ETU had to find jobs for them, and they had some arrangement in places where they were very strong, like the Co-op and London Underground in the Chiswick Works, where they could place blacklisted electricians in order to secure a living for them. So it extended well beyond the construction industry. Funnily enough, he didn't realise when he told me that he would end up working as an electrician in the Co-op repairing milk floats, because he too was blacklisted for trade union activity. So the point that I want to leave with you is this, that in the publication that we've recently put out from the Institute of Employment Rights, a manifesto for labour law, Keith Ewing and I, as perhaps the lead authors, you're hearing from Professor Ewing after lunch, have put forward, amongst other things, a proposal for the restoration of sectoral collective bargaining. I'm very proud to say that John and Jeremy have endorsed this as a proposal for the next Labour government. On Tuesday, the TUC passed a resolution agreeing to promote these ideas. But I think there's a lesson to be learned here. If we're going to have sectoral bargaining with all the benefits that it brings, democracy at the workplace, social justice, the compression of inequality, the prevention of social dumping by bringing in cheap labour to undercut existing terms and conditions and so on, the benefits that it has on the economy, as many economists have demonstrated, the compliance that collective bargaining has with the requirements of international law and so on, we have to protect against blacklisting as well. And that means that these sectoral collective agreements, after John has set up the Ministry of Labour, these joint industrial councils have got to build into these collective agreements protection against blacklisting. Of course, they've got to also include mechanisms for the promotion of whistleblowing and for the protection of whistleblowers as well. But I think it's an important lesson to be learned in this, rather lacking in depth historical tour through collective bargaining and blacklisting. It's an important lesson that if we're going to have effective collective agreements, they've got to include protection against blacklisting. And Dave, I think one of the things that we may have missed in the settlement of the blacklisting litigation, compensation for the men and a few women as well, but maybe we should have thought about how the existing collective agreements in civil engineering, construction, could have been strengthened in order to ensure a specific mechanism to protect blacklisting. Anyway, it's been a great pleasure, privilege working with you over all the years, mate. Thanks for listening.